back to wrap up the books that I ended up reading in the month of September and October. I have so many books to talk about. I have, I think, 17 total books to talk about. The first book that I want to talk about is Hit Girls. This is by Nora Princiotti. This is an author whose podcast I do listen to, as someone who's been reading random podcast books but don't listen to the podcast. This one is one that I do listen to. Nora Princiotti does 2 different podcasts that I listen to. The one that I mostly listen to is Every Single Album that she does for the Ringer Network, and it's mostly a pop music podcast. And then she also does the We're Obsessed podcast, which is more of a pop culture, celebrity culture kind of podcast. Something that I really enjoyed in this book is that it felt like I was kind of going down memory lane, relearning about pop stars. She focuses in the early 2000s to the 2010s. I would say the people that she mostly focuses on are Britney Spears, Kelly Clarkson, Avril Lavigne, Ashley Simpson, Jessica Simpson, Beyonce, Taylor Swift. The chapters that I found most interesting were the stories that I hadn't heard before. I would say that I've probably heard the majority of these women's life stories and their careers basically, so I knew a lot of the things that she was talking about. But the people that I didn't know that much about was Kelly Clarkson and Avril Lavigne. I found that part so interesting to kind of learn about rock influences and pop during this time and how Kelly Clarkson and Avril Lavigne used those in their music. These are all pop stars that could have their own books made about them, so parts of this book did feel like little snapshots that you kind of wanted a fuller meal about these pop stars, and you're kind of getting just an appetizer for my enjoyment of it. I really enjoyed my time listening to this book. It's narrated by the author. She does put in kind of her own, where she was at in her life when she was getting into this kind of music, and I gave it 4 stars. After that, I read a book that I did not really like, and that was Library Girl. This is by Horvath, I believe, and this is a middle grade book that I thought looked really cute. I really like the cover. I'll read anything about libraries and books, to be honest, and this one really disappointed me. It's told kind of in a Roald Dahl, old-timey kind of way, with a narrator that sees all. The way that it used that old-timey stuff but in a modern setting felt really clunky to me. It felt out of place. There's a lot in this book about how these women never were able to have children, but they were goo goo gaga, they needed to have babies. And I just didn't like how that sat with me. Just the way that they talk about diets and how they believe that they're fat and unlikable because of that. I did not like the way that the author wrote those kinds of sections. And there's also kind of a big twist of how the story unfolds, where you learn why this girl was raised in a library with these librarians and where she came from, where her parents were. That left a really bad taste in my mouth. It was kind of bullying, mean at the end. Really disappointed by this book, so I give it 2 stars. Then I read Death in the Jungle. This is by Candace Fleming, right? This was really fantastic. I recommend this to older teens and adults, not necessarily younger teens. I really thought that it was so fast-paced, propulsive, it made you want to keep listening to see how the story unfolded. I know most of the story of Jonestown. I've watched plenty of documentaries and learned about it by reading stuff online, but it was still really good to see kind of 3-dimensional way of these folks and how they decided to become involved with the People's Temple, and then how they decided to go to Guyana. You get to follow specific people that the author really focuses on. It's really fascinating to learn about this time period, this event, what was happening in America that made something like this spring up and have people following it. I think that maybe the way that it ended up talking about Jones saying that he kind of lost his way because of the substances that he was taking. I really think it was more the authoritarian control that he was seeking, he was losing, and that made him become even more violent. So maybe it needed to be a little bit tougher in the end when it discusses him. But overall, I really enjoyed my time with this book, and it's a great nonfiction title if you're interested in any of the topics of, the People's Temple or Jonestown. It also had really good pictures in the middle as well, which I liked. I ended up giving that one 4 stars. After that, I read a book I do have finally, and that is Penance by Eliza Clark. This book, I kind of went in it with a little bit of trepidation. I was wanting kind of a darker read, and this definitely delivered a darker read. This is kind of a weird book to me, just in the way that it's told, in the setting and in these girls in particular, and how they are connected to the online world. This book is for people who grew up with 2010s Tumblr. I think that when reading this, you'll kind of see yourself, like see the darker parts of Tumblr, because parts of it were pretty dark that I recall. In this book, we're following the death of someone, and these other girls are kind of pinned as the reason why this happened. But you're also learning more about the town. You're learning about their families, like what's expected out of them from their families, and just like how hard it is to be a girl in this town. This town is also kind of weird. There's like weird things that have happened in it, and the way that it's told is weird too, because it's from the perspective of like someone who is writing a book about it, but he is not a good person. He is not a good and kind person to the victims and to the victims' families, and he's more just like seeking all of this information to feed the true crime like circuit. There's also like podcasts featured in here, which you can also see like that grossness of true crime depicted. So I really liked learning all the perspective of the people in the town. I think that this was a well-crafted novel where like you're learning little pieces over time, told by a very flawed narrator, but overall an interesting look at teenage girls and what makes them tick, and a pretty disturbing dark read. I definitely want to try more Eliza Clark books after this, and I gave this one 4 stars. After that, I read Bad Company. This is Private Equity and the Death of the American Dream by Megan Greenwell. This book focuses on 4 different people in different towns in America as whatever it is that they're involved in gets taken over by private equity and kind of changes the company or the organization that they were a part of. It follows, for example, a retail worker that worked at Toys R Us for many, many years, an apartment renter and housing advocate. It follows a journalist who also works for a company that's been taken over by private equity, as well as a doctor and rural health advocate in Wyoming whose hospital is being taken over by private equity. It's definitely a book that is telling a narrative. It's trying to focus more on the human dynamic of the stories, which I liked. It's something that I usually like in nonfiction when I feel and see the emotion and what's going on with the actual people involved. I do think that this book is a little strong on how it demonizes private equity, which it does horrible things in our government and in our economy. But I think that maybe it's a little bit more complex, and this book doesn't really delve into the complexities of that. Like one big main thing that they talked a lot about is like Toys R Us losing to Amazon, and basically why I kind of feel like, oh, it's a little bit more complex than that is because Toys R Us like shook hands with Amazon and let Amazon sell its things as well. So it kind of was involved in its own demise, in my opinion. And I think this book is more focused on just like private equity bad, period. I did enjoy my time with this book. I think that we definitely need to think about private equity way more and like how it affects our day-to-day lives. So many things have been bought out by private equity in the last, I don't know, 20 years. Like Southwest is a big one that's just been bought out, and it's completely changing the experience of the customer with Southwest, for example. But it's something that's happening a lot more and should definitely be taken more into account by us. I ended up giving that book 4 stars. Then I read Frankly in Love, and actually I'll talk about 3 books that are all related that I read kind of close together because of a work assignment. So I read Frankly in Love by David Yoon, and I thought that it was quite quirky at first, but it kind of got grating towards the end. It felt like a John Green novel, but not as emotionally resonant as a John Green novel. The main character is kind of all over the place and is trying to like figure himself out and trying to talk to girls, trying to talk to his family who they just have a lot of issues that they have to deal with. I just didn't quite like how the plot came through. There was like cheating involved and trying to figure out how these 2 kids are going to get together, but like hurting people along the way or being confused along the way. It's all things that are real, but I didn't necessarily love the writing. I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. I also read Everything by Nicola Yoon, and that one I really enjoyed how genuine the emotion felt from the characters. I did end up rating it 3.5 stars because I felt like it was a little bit overwrought at the end. I think this is the perfect book to give to a teen though who loves those kind of twist endings or is seeking those twist endings from so many mystery thrillers these days. Kids really love those things. They kind of love having their minds blown in the last, 20 pages. And this book delivers that. I think that this book is really interesting in the kinds of conversations that it wants to have about protection, about keeping your family safe. But I think it's not very realistic. I think that the stuff that happens in it is a little bit not possible, not as feasible. I did enjoy my time with this book. I did think that it was well written. I did think that it was emotional, and I really enjoyed the main character. I also read by Nicola Yoon, The Sun Is Also a Star. This one, the main characters are a little bit older. The main focus of the book is more about immigration and being deported. The main character is about to be deported. It's like a whirlwind romance of like 24 hours where they kind of like keep meeting up in the city and just learning about each other and falling in love throughout the day. That's what makes it a little bit unrealistic, but I did think that the love story was sweet. I loved Natasha, the main character, and like her take on success and, you know, like what she needs to do to be successful, but that is taking away from her passions and her dreams. Very real conversations that I think that this book did a good job at talking about. Okay, so after that I read Ready or Not, which is a graphic novel that I gave 3 stars to. I loved the illustrations. I loved in particular the colors. The colors are beautiful in this graphic novel, and I would definitely pick up something else by this author just because I love the look of it so much. The thing that falters in this book is the storytelling and the characters, especially towards the end. I felt like the last third was really like, what is happening here and why is this happening? The characters make so many big mistakes, and the way that they hurt each other's feelings felt like it was being done just for conflict, and it didn't feel paid off well in the resolution. It felt a little bit too much. So while I love the illustrations, I didn't quite love the plot and the characters as much. After that I read SHOPGIRLS. This is by Jessica Anya Blau, who wrote a book that I loved a couple years ago called Mary Jane. That book was a coming of age novel that I thought was quite exquisite, and how the character changed over time being with people who were really unlike her and her family. So I was really looking forward to SHOPGIRLS, and I kind of wanted that like historical fiction-y feeling of it, but also that coming of age. This book is that. It is a coming of age story, and it is taking place in a historical setting. In particular, this one happens in San Francisco area in the 1980s, and it's taking place in a department store that this girl works at, trying to help people find clothes and ringing them up and stuff like that. She makes great relationships with the people at her work, and there's also a roommate. She has a really lovely roommate that's kind of like her sister in a way, who's older and is like teaching her all of these things about how to be a woman, basically. The thing about this book is that it's way funnier than Mary Jane. While Mary Jane was quite funny, this one was like really silly and lighthearted. I didn't think that it had that like, you know, big emotional impact because it was a little bit like less stakes were involved than in Mary Jane, in my opinion. But I did enjoy the silliness of this book. Like, there are bits in this book that made me snort and laugh while I was listening to the audiobook. I think that's kind of it though. It's a 3-star read because it is just like cute, lighthearted, and sweet, but it doesn't go to the next level. So while I enjoyed this one, I did not like it more than Mary Jane, and I am wondering now that like I've read both of these by the same author if Mary Jane was just kind of like the one. Curious what the author will do next. I read a really short, quick book, which I'm trying to read more in Spanish this year. So I read a book by an author that I've read from before, Francisco Jimenez, and this is a short story of his. It's called La Mariposa, the butterfly, and it's about going to school for the first time and trying to adapt to a new school system. They don't know how to speak English, and it really reminded me of the book that I read by this author, The Circuit, but with a different character and with not as many siblings. It was quite sweet. I really enjoy the way that this author writes, and it was interesting to read it in Spanish and to kind of use context clues for words that I didn't know as well, or like use the dictionary. So that was quite a good experience for me, and definitely trying to read at least one more Spanish book in 2025, hopefully one that's like actually a full-size novel. Anyway, I ended up giving La Mariposa 4 stars. Then I read Lunar New Year Love Story. Finally, I've had this book out for a long time, and I read the first like half in a quick period, and then I set it down and I didn't pick it back up again for a while. But yeah, this is by Jinling Yang and LeUyen Pham, who are 2 creators that I love. They are very much involved in teen and middle grade books. This is quite a chunky graphic novel actually, and it is like an original fiction story, so it's not based off of anything autobiographical. It is a love story, as you can see from the title. The main character starts talking to one boy and then discovers that she really likes another boy, and they do dancing, traditional dancing, like with dragon costumes, which is really cool to see. There's also a lot of social media in this book that is, I think, relatable to teens. And the main crux of this book is that Valentina, the main character, has been basically abandoned by her mother and raised by her father, and so she believes that love will never find her again. And she loves Valentine's Day and she wants to find love, but she feels like she's not going to. I really enjoyed the father-daughter relationship in this book, as well as the grandmother taking a big part in this book. She brought a lot of lightness and humor to the story that was necessary because it is kind of dark. But ultimately I ended up settling on 3 stars for this one, just because it wasn't as like propulsive and as fast-paced as I wanted it to be. It did feel like, oh, I have to pick it back up, instead of like, I want to know what happens next. It just maybe needed a little bit of editing, a little bit of cutting some scenes to make it a little bit more fast-paced. Then I read Semi-Well-Adjusted, Despite Nearly Everything. Despite Everything? It's a really long title. The new memoir by Alyson Stoner. Quite a revealing memoir, I would say, if you are interested in Disney kids, Disney Channel kids, and what happened like that time period of like the late 2000s into the early 2010s. I think that this is really insightful. It's really an interesting look at Hollywood through the lens of child actors and performers. She was involved in like Dancing for Missy Elliott videos, which is how I found out about her. And it's really fascinating to learn how that wasn't like a form of dance that she was super involved in before she got going with the Missy Elliott videos and like the Eminem videos. Mike's Super Short Show, which I also like have memories of watching when I was young, trying to get a starring role in one of these shows or movies. Apparently like the whole idea of Camp Rock was like from her talking with people, and like they thought that she was going to be the main character of Camp Rock, and then it ended up being Demi Lovato and she was like a side character. And I think that that is like her Hollywood story, is like never the bride and like always the bridesmaid. She has dealt with a lot of perfectionism. She never turned to like drugs and alcohol, but she did turn to restricting calories, anorexia, and just the way that she treated her body. And it's what she's done after that. She has really changed her goals. She doesn't do a lot of, you know, TVs or movies anymore. She does a lot of voice roles, but she mostly does like psychology stuff on YouTube. Well, I do think that there's a little bit of therapy speak in some of the way that she talks about her experiences. I do think that there are still many eye-opening and vulnerable moments that she shares in this memoir. I wish that the last part of it wasn't as rushed. It felt a little bit rushed in some of like the last like really traumatic things that happened to her that she kind of just like waves off. I did end up rating this book 4 stars, and I think it's a great memoir, especially if you want to learn more about child stars and Hollywood, and if you're of my generation and you know anything about Alyson Stoner, I think it's fascinating to learn more about her journey. After that, I read Never Again Will I Visit Auschwitz, which, remember like 2 videos ago I said I'm not going to read anything else about World War II or the Holocaust this year? Well, I thought it looked really interesting, and the illustration style also drew me in. This is a family story from the perspective of Ari Richter. I learned later after this was done that he's married to the person who wrote the book about Notorious RBG, which I read a while ago. So she's like involved in this book as well as one of the people that he talks about in this memoir. His family history with the Holocaust and what happened to his family, what parts of his family escaped. They ended up in the United States, what parts of their family stayed behind, and you know what ended up happening to them. It's a story about trying to gather all of this information and put it in one place so that you can tell the future generation about it. And it's also about traveling to see Auschwitz in person. The questions that some of his family members also have about going back to Germany and reclaiming their German citizenship. Interesting to see when he actually went to Auschwitz and how like the touristy aspect of it felt like icky and strange and just like a weird situation. And just learning about his family's history through, you know, videos and documents that he was able to recover was super fascinating. I thought that this was a really well done memoir, graphic memoir, and I recommend it. I gave it 4 stars. Okay, I have 3 more books to talk about. I finished Wards of the State, and this is a book that I was really anticipating and I'm really glad I read. I think it was one of the books that was in the National Book Award long list, short list. This book really called to me when I saw that list, and so I listened to the audiobook. I thought that it was really fantastic. If you love learning about narrative nonfiction you know, life stories of kids who are facing homelessness in the United States, you know, like what going into the foster care system or what being a runaway does to their mental health, and what decisions and what opportunities are available to them. A lot of them make a lot of big mistakes. Some of them hurt others in the process. And in this book, you focus on a few people who have like met kind of the foster care to prison pipeline is the main focus of this book. And it starts with one subject who has murdered someone. It was kind of shown that she could have gotten away without doing this final act. A brain that wasn't developed fully, making bad decisions. How her life experience with her family led her down this path and where she's at now, and kind of like her journey through forgiveness. It talks about other people that are focused more in the past. So that was also interesting that it didn't just have like kids today, but also like historically, how has it been for kids who are in foster care who meet and end up in jail or prison. Pretty much it's a broken system, it's a hard system, and there are a lot of faults with it, even though people are trying to do their best. One part of this book focuses on a judge in New Orleans, and in New Orleans Parish, which is the biggest area there. She made a lot of news because of her very much lack of sending kids to foster care, regardless of like the neglect or the things that were on paper as demerits for their family. She pretty much always sided with keeping the kids with the families and not causing family separation. Really a good book if you like the topics of reunification, being placed with kin whenever possible, attachment theory, and also child brain development. There are so many things that we have learned about child brain development in the last 50 years that we didn't have before that is very important in how we treat and deal with kids and teens in foster care, and what we expect of their decision-making skills at that age just because of how their brain has developed. It's a great narrative nonfiction book for folks who like to learn about people and folks who like to learn about how state systems work, and I gave it 5 stars. Okay, I also read another anticipated fiction book for me that has been anticipated, it feels like, for everyone, and that is Claire McConaghy's new book. Is her name Claire? Charlotte. Not Claire. Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I did enjoy my time with it. This was so much more pining, longing, and like romance than I anticipated. I don't know, I thought, you know, this is like a climate novel and it's like a family, but I didn't necessarily expect it to be so much like the male main character and the female main character like wanting to be with each other. I really got wrapped up in this family saga and seeing them being in like an impossible situation. I loved the child characters in particular. I loved Orly. Rowan and Orly's relationship with each other was like so sweet to see on the page. I didn't care that much or as much about the stories of the other 2 siblings. There's like a lot of things that happen to them that are maybe not as well displayed to us, given to us. I feel like a lot of this novel deals or wants to focus on those reveals. Like it very slowly feeds you pieces, bread nuggets throughout this trail that you're picking up. And some of the reveals just weren't as satisfying as I wanted them to be for how long I had to wait to have them revealed to me. I think that the world was great. It was so bleak. It was very well crafted. It felt like I was there. It felt like I was smelling the ocean and, you know, going into their areas where they had all of their like plants growing and seeds and things. The mystery does take a long time to be revealed to us, so if that's something that is a struggle for you like it is for me, I'm kind of just like, tell me already, please tell me already. I am really sad about the ending, but I understand the ending, so I thought that it was a good choice. This book, what it does the best is that it really looks at my generation's struggle with having kids in the world that we exist in today, in the climate problems that we exist in today, and is having kids worth it? Are we doing justice to our kids by having them be born into this world? Those are a lot of the themes and questions that this book poses that I think are very interesting. I think ultimately the book is saying that kids are important to us finding our way through these issues, and that we all together can join to build a better world. I think that that's kind of where the book landed for me. Yeah, very well done book, and I definitely want to read more by this author. Last book. I read The Murder Next Door by Hugh DeAndrade, and this is a graphic memoir. And again, this is another one similar to the Auschwitz book that I saw when I was like walking around the library, and I was like, oh, that looks interesting to me. The way that the illustrations look also are really interesting to me. And this book is really heavy. The way that this book starts off is by talking about growing up in the town that he grew up. This is something that happened many decades ago. The author's probably like in his 50s now, and when he was a really young boy, like in his, I don't know, he was like 8 or 10, his neighborhood friends called him over and said like, something's wrong with my mom, and he went inside and he saw the mom of his neighbor dead. And they could never figure out why, what happened, who did it. There were a lot of questions about, did the husband do it, or did somebody that was coming through in the area do it, and they just never knew. This moment in time caused a lot of issues for him as he grew up. So that trauma really influenced his life, you know, always being on alert, and how he even talks about, you know, how men could do this to women. And he really looks internally at like how there are so many men, which are his brethren, that are capable of doing this to women. So he talks a lot about that misogyny that exists in our world that he sees. Most of this book is actually him talking to his therapist, and his therapist helping him through all of that anger that he has. And I think also the way that we learn at the end what did happen to the neighbor is good for the mental health of the author, who hopefully that has helped him heal further. I thought that the illustrations were quite great. I think that they fit kind of the story that we're telling. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. All the books that I have to talk about. I hope that you enjoyed watching this. I hope that you got some new recommendations. I hope to see you again in my next video. Bye.